What happens is resentment comes from re, which means again, and sentire. Sentire means to feel. Resentment is to feel anger again and again and again until you become paralyzed. And this is what happens to most of us. We become paralyzed. We we go through life instead of growing through life, we go through life.
This is By Joyan Season 2. I'm your host, Joyan Chan, and every Wednesday we bring you inspiring stories, powerful message, and fun conversations with me and my special guests and friends, and it's my personal mission to empower you to live and lead a life with joy. This podcast is for you if you're looking for more joy, courage, passion, and purpose in your life. Now let's dive into today's episode and get ready to laugh, learn, and live your life to the fullest. Our guest today is an internationally recognized authority in the fields of relationships, leadership, emotional intelligence, relational healing, and personal transformation. His research centers on how we develop high quality relationships and manage challenging emotions such as loneliness, resentment, depression, and anxiety. He has coached leaders from G20 governments, Fortune 500 companies, and some of the world's largest non-profits. He directs the Center for Sustainable Leadership at Lewis Business School in Rome and has lectured on leadership at Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, and Georgetown universities. He has been featured in Fortune, USA Today, and Forbes, and has a regular column in Psychology Today. His best-selling book, Love and Suffering: Break the Emotional Chains That Prevent You from Experiencing Love, was released in April 2025. So, ladies and gentlemen, help me in welcoming Professor Anthony Silard.
Hey, thank you, Joyan. I love your show and I appreciate your inviting me on.
Awesome. It's my pleasure and it's my honor. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is your book, Love and Suffering. I'm just curious, like, what is the key message behind your book and what is your perspective on the connection between the two, love and suffering?
Okay, thanks, Joyan. Well, the let's first say the key message is what I call the love progression model, which is that we can move from suffering toward love, and there are four plateaus. There's suffering, acceptance, forgiveness, and suffering. Okay, let me just say that again. The four plateaus are acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, and love, and each plateau has an obstacle that has to be overcome. So we overcome suffering to reach a state of acceptance. We overcome resentment to reach a state of forgiveness. We overcome judgment to reach a state of gratitude. And then we overcome what I call incarceration to reach a state of love. Now, the connection between love and suffering is that suffering is often a guide post for us to help us understand who and what we love and why we love them or why we love it. And then on the other side, when we love someone or love something really profoundly, we can also suffer because of that. And there's a lot of different ways that can happen. It's the kind of the yearning, wanting, you know, love is kind of an ideal state that we all aspire toward. And then what we experience with other human beings in our real life is always like kind of sometimes gets very close to that ideal state of love, but sometimes feels like it's further from it than we want it to be, and that's the suffering. It's like the ideal is always above the real. The ideal is love, and then the real messy relationships we have from day to day are usually not quite reaching that ideal, and that's where we suffer.
Right. Okay, so can you repeat again the love progression model? I didn't catch that. So it's acceptance and
Yeah, it's acceptance, forgiveness,
forgiveness.
gratitude, and love. Yeah, and so for example, we overcome an obstacle to get to each one. Let me give an example. So so Bill was an Air Force pilot. He's living in his very nice suburban home in the Midwest of the United States, and this is around 1970, and he gets drafted to go and as a pilot and go to Vietnam to fight in what Americans call the Vietnam War and the Vietnamese still today call the American War. So he goes over there within 2 months, he's captured. He's a prisoner of war, and he's in a jail cell where it's filled with mosquitoes and rats and cockroaches, and he loses like 30 pounds, and really, like, he's about to die. Like, he's not managing it at all. It's a horrible situation, and is reaching a dead end in his life, and just can't believe, why did this happen to me? Why am I the victim of this? I was, with my family. He and his wife had just had 2 children, and now he's in this jail cell, and he believes that he hears this voice, and the voice says, "This is your life." And from that moment, he's like, "Oh my God, it's totally true. This is my life now. I have to accept it." And so once he accepts that, okay, this is the situation. He's captured. He's a prisoner of war. He starts exercising. He starts talking with some of the other prisoners, and that leads to him managing and being able to finish out the war in his jail cell in Hanoi, and eventually return home. So this is just one example, but if you look at the psychological research, being able to accept where we are instead of trying to avoid it, it's called experiential avoidance. So, Joyan, acceptance is the beginning of self-directed change, and a lot of us try to avoid acceptance. We try to avoid accepting the reality of our life, even the emotions that we feel. In fact, basically every addiction known to humankind is an attempt to avoid what we're experiencing inside. So every emotion we feel, we don't. Many of us will go to great lengths to run away from these emotions, to pretend we don't feel these emotions. And acceptance is different. Acceptance is saying, okay, whatever I'm feeling, I don't have to act on it. Just because I feel something doesn't make it true. But I want to accept this is what I'm feeling in this moment, about what's going on around me, what's going on in the world. So many of us are so disillusioned with what's happening in the world right now, for example. And the way to change it is not to avoid it, pretend it's not going on, but to say, hey, okay, this is the reality. This is what's happening. I'm going to accept it, that this is happening right now. And then I'm going to, with that real information, now I can make decisions about how to change it.
Okay. So let's say just take an example of someone who is avoiding a feeling, all right? It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be stress, or it could be loneliness. Once we accept that, okay, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, what is the next step?
Well, okay, let's think of an example here. So I have a lot of case studies in love and suffering. One of them is James, and James is scared to commit to any woman, right? He sleeps around, and then he later regrets it. He feels badly about himself. So he came to see me, and what I was able to draw out from James is that James considered his mother to be unstable because she divorced his father. And so he runs from relationship to relationship. And what happens is that he holds all this resentment inside toward his mother. And I think all of your listeners can relate to this. I mean, whether you've experienced feeling resentment toward someone where you didn't feel they treated you fairly, you felt shortchanged by the way someone acted toward you. You wonder, well, why did you have to go through what you went through with this person? Why didn't they treat you better? And what happens is resentment comes from re, which means again, and sentire. Sentire means to feel. Resentment is to feel anger again and again and again until you become paralyzed. And this is what happens to most of us. We become paralyzed. We go through life, instead of growing through life, we go through life. And as a result, we really become stuck. We become stuck in our careers, and we become stuck in our personal lives, in our intimate life, in our relationships with our family members, because we hold all this resentment inside. So the opposite of resentment is the obstacle for the plateau, which in the love progression model, which is forgiveness. So forgiveness is where we say, okay, how can, like, instead of resenting this person, I want to make the decision to forgive them. And And what's interesting is that a lot of people say, well, why would you forgive someone that who betrayed you, who treated you really badly, and so forth. And what a lot of people don't realize, Joyan, is that is that forgiveness is necessary for personal development, because otherwise we become stuck again, become paralyzed. Now, forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to trust that person again. It doesn't mean you have to have a continued relationship with that person, but it does mean that you have to let go of this sort of emotional chain inside you, this knot that gets tied within you that prevents you from feeling free again, from being able to love with an open heart. And this is what happens to most of us.
What if the person you have to forgive is yourself?
That's a wonderful question, Joyanne. And actually, that's the hardest person to forgive,
Right.
because we judge ourselves and we say, well, how could I have done that? And we regret what we did in the past. The interesting thing is that really you cannot forgive anyone else in your life until you forgive yourself. And in the case of the relationship with the self, with ourselves, forgiveness is critical, because so let's go back to forgiveness is necessary for personal development. If we want to have a continued relationship with another person, it's not forgiveness that we need, it's trust.
Mm.
To be able to trust that this person is going to be accountable, this person is going to be credible of what they say, they're going to do what they say, and that they're going to be predictable. We can build our lives around this person, and so we're going to trust them and have a continued relationship. I have many clients who've come to me in the leadership and life coaching I do, and have said to me, well, I don't know how I can trust my spouse again after they cheated on me. And I tell them I can't answer that question, but you have to ask yourself, do you believe what they tell you now? Are they accountable? Are they going to like they feel a sense of repentance for what they've done, a sense of shame, guilt. They want to change it, and not only are they being accountable, but are they credible? Do you believe that they can change it? And then, if so, are they predictable, that you feel that you can build your life around them again, and they're not going to betray you again like that? And so that's the interesting thing, is that forgiveness is necessary for personal development. Trust is necessary for relationship development. And in other words, without trust, we can't continue the relationship. But we can forgive someone and still not continue the relationship. We can, these two are different. What one piece of advice we're given, Joyan, like throughout our lives, especially as children, is forgive and forget. And I think that's really poor advice, actually. I would say forgive and remember. Okay, I'm not going to say, okay, put 100 stick-it notes around your room reminding you of what this person did. No, I'm not going to say like read a poem about what they did every Saturday night before you go out. No, but think of it like each person is like a file that you put in a file cabinet. And within that file, you have all the information you've gathered over all the years about them. And in the end, if you're going to keep that file in your cabinet, you're going to continue that relationship, is because you feel that it's that this person is worthy of your giving your love, your time, your energy to. And this is the thing, like telling someone forgive and forget would be like saying, okay, you were walking home at night and you fell into a ditch. Well, forget the location of the ditch. You don't need to know where it is anymore. Obviously, that would be really poor advice. So it's same, like forgive and forget is kind of like saying forget where the ditch is. It's okay to remember, this is what I have to be careful of with any particular person. Put that in the file, into the cabinet. But in your mind and your heart, when you forgive, you let go. But it doesn't mean you continue the relationship. That depends on each person. And like you said, all of this begins with forgiving ourselves. Because the interesting thing about forgiveness is impossible without judgment. You can't forgive someone unless you first judge them. So that's the irony, is that if you don't judge someone, there's no need for forgiveness. If you need to forgive yourself, it's because you judged yourself. And so you now have to question that judgment, the same as with another person. You'd question, why did I judge them? Maybe when I judged them, I was judging them based on my values, and I was judging their actions or their behaviors. Or maybe you say, okay, whatever they did that I have so much trouble forgiving, this happened, in the past. They had they had different psychological, emotional, and social resources back then than they do now. But I'm judging them based on my perception of their social, emotional, psychological resources, but they've changed, and maybe I need to give them room, have a little more lightness in my heart, and allow them to change.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful the way you put it. Yeah, again, so many people talk about forgive and forget, and especially when it comes to love and relationship, they got hurt, right? And they are so afraid to go into a new relationship. I'm sure that's very common.
Hmm.
Um, and in your work, you present suffering as a pathway rather than a barrier to love. It's almost like you you have to suffer. Like suffering is part of the package, right? If you want to love, you have to suffer. So can you unpack this idea for someone who currently sees pain as something to avoid at all costs?
Wow, you have wonderful questions, Joanne. I'm really enjoying this. So, well, let me share with you one of the quotes I have in Love and Suffering is is don't let someone else's suffering spoil your own, because each of us has suffered in our own ways. And actually, that pain, that suffering, there are two things that can happen with your suffering. Okay, the first is what I call the coin, which has suffering on one side or pain on one side, and the other side is anger. And this is what most of us do. We take this coin, we suffer, and so we flip it and it becomes anger. And if you look generally, this is more a pattern than a broad stroke, more of like a common configuration than a blueprint. If you look at gender, you'll see that on if you look at large national and international samples, that what men tend to do with their anger is they let it transmute into aggression. They externalize the anger and they go looking for people who they think cause that anger, and they fight against them, they attack them. Women, on the other hand, tend to take that anger and they internalize it. They let the instead of letting the anger become aggression, they let the anger become depression, and they target themselves. This is if you look at the psychological research on anger management, this is what tends to happen. Of course, not for any individual man or individual woman, but if you look across generally, what happens on average, this is the picture. And either way, again, that anger is going to paralyze you. It becomes resentment. The other option we have is to look at, well, what can we do with this suffering instead of letting it naturally convert into anger directed externally or internally? What if we were to take this suffering and do something life changing with it? And that's what love and suffering is all about. Let me give you an example. So, so Janet was a marketing director in a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical company who came to me for coaching, and Janet essentially came to me and said, Anthony, I can't even get out of bed. That's how much I hate my job. I don't want to go in there. It's like, it's, it just feels so, I can't explain it, but I'm just so unmotivated there. And so I said, okay, well, Janet, let's take a look at what you've experienced in your life. And taking a psychoanalytic approach, I asked her, well, tell me what have you experienced? What have you gone through in your life? And Janet says, okay, well, Anthony, actually, I did not have a good childhood at all. My father passed away from cancer when I was 12, and my whole childhood was essentially my mother and I nurturing him before he passed away. So I always ask people in my conferences, can you guess what kind of career change did I help Janet to make? And a lot of people will say, well, is she a nurse now? No, she's not. Janet is the director of a major hospital, leading a team of doctors and researchers to find cures to cancer and other diseases so fewer families will suffer the way her family suffered. So what a lot of people don't realize and is that the word passion comes from pati in Latin, or patire, which means to suffer. So actually, if so, passion comes from suffering. If you look at, for example, in Christianity, you have the crucifixion, the suffering, the passion of Christ. If you look at, for example, in African cultures, you have the phoenix rising from the ashes. If you look at many cultural and religious traditions in Buddhism, for example, there's suffering is the beginning of the path toward enlightenment. So you have in many cultural religious traditions, you have this construct of suffering from suffering can emerge something beautiful, something amazing. But that's the thing, is that most of us, what we do instead is that we go through life instead of growing through life. So we feel that suffering, we let it become anger, and we attack others, or we attack ourselves. And either way, what happens is that we become paralyzed. What I've seen, because I'm a leadership professor and trainer. I teach here at Louis Business School in Rome. I've also taught, as you mentioned, at Harvard, Georgetown, Stanford. What I've found is that leaders always, really, the really effective leaders, they take that suffering and they transform it into a passion to change something in their life and in the lives of others. And this is, so this is what happened with Janet. This is what I've experienced in my own life. I mean, I grew up with physical abuse from a stepfather. So when you're 12 years old, a man comes into your home, beats you up, and sleeps with your mother. You don't feel like much of a person. That's how I felt growing up. So all the way into my early 30s, what did I do? I let that suffering naturally become anger. I Anger toward others. I used to get in all kinds of fights and do all kinds of things I shouldn't have been doing. And I internalized it, and I felt really, really low self-esteem. I felt poorly about myself. And so other kids would make fun of me and such, because I didn't know what to say to them. I just didn't have a strong sense of self with that. And well, so what eventually happened, by the time I was in my early 30s, I knew I was stuck. I knew I had to make a change. And I went hiking alone in Argentina, in Patagonia, for 2 weeks in the forest, and beautiful, beautiful scenery. And I sort of started thinking, like, well, how can I forgive my now ex stepfather for what happened when I was a young boy. And what I did actually now has become one of the core exercises in love and suffering, which is, what I reckon. And you may, perhaps your listeners, you guys can do this too as we're talking about it. What I did is I wrote down. I had my little notepad with me, and I wrote down, what are the actions that he took that are so difficult for me to forgive. And so, yeah, so he threw me down against a radiator, almost broke my back. I couldn't walk right for a week. And I wrote a bunch of other actions that he had taken, behaviors of his. And then in the second column, so in the first column, write down, what actions are you having trouble forgiving someone for. We talked about someone cheating on you, betrayal. I'm sure with your listeners, there's going to be hundreds of different reasons that you cannot forgive someone. Well, write down those actions in the first column. In the second column, write down, what character quality do you associate with each of those actions. So in my case, he threw me down and almost broke my back. Okay, well, what character quality is that? Well, that's insensitivity, callousness, insecurity, that you're going to be like a grown man attacking a little boy, right? All of these kinds of things, right? And so I wrote all of those down. And so you can do the same. You can write down, what character qualities do you associate with the actions that you have so much trouble forgiving in this person. Now for the third column. The third column is the showstopper. This is the one where people go silent. In the third column, write down, for each of those character qualities, who in your life would associate that character quality with you. At any point in your life, they would feel that you acted that way toward them. And so in the case of my doing this exercise, I thought, okay, well, insensitive, callous. Well, I've also been insensitive. I've also been callous. I've also hurt people. I've also done things that I wish I hadn't done. And I started writing down, okay, who would feel that way about me? And this actually opened my heart and enabled me to forgive him and say, here's a man. I was living in Washington D.C. That's where it all happened. Here's a man who came to Washington, had a great job as a journalist. He was fired, unemployed. He felt like society just kind of spit him out, chewed him up, and spit him out. And the only way he could build his own sense of self was to attack a young boy. That's obviously not a very good thing to do. I'm, you know, the forgiveness has not also become trust. I never decided, okay, I want to go back and find him and build a relationship with him. That wasn't in the cards. It was more that it was, again, trust is for relationship development. That relationship was not continuing, but forgiveness is for personal development, and it helped me to release to break that emotional chain, release that all that negativity inside of me, all that resentment, and that enabled me to love again. So I'm really grateful. That's the next plateau, is gratitude, which we could also talk about, because feeling once you pass a sense of forgiveness, and this is the irony, is that many theologians and philosophers, they say forgiveness is the highest form of love, and I totally disagree, because forgiveness is something we all need to do when there's someone we feel resentment toward. Let me tell you, I've coached thousands of Fortune 500 CEOs, senior leaders, nonprofit, government ministers, mayors, and every single one, the only way I could get them to move forward in their life was to recognize there was someone in their life they needed to forgive. And I'll say the same thing to your listeners. I'm sure each of you has someone in your life you need to forgive. And that's probably why you're tuned in to Joyanne's wonderful podcast. So, recognizing that, being able to forgive them is the first step. But then once you forgive, it's also important to recognize, again, forgiveness is impossible without judgment. The Afghan poet Rumi once wrote, there is a field beyond right doing and wrongdoing. There is a field beyond right doing and wrongdoing. I'll meet you there. And this is the thing, is that forgiveness actually is patronizing. It's actually paternalistic. Hey, how would you like someone to say to you, Joyanne, Joyanne, you made my life miserable. It was such a horrible time. I went through many difficult moments, but I want you to know that I forgive you. I can't speak for you, but I certainly wouldn't want anyone to say that to me, because forgiveness is a power play. It's basically saying, I hold moral rectitude. I have this knowledge and wisdom around what is right and wrong. You have done wrong, and I forgive you. I judge you for doing wrong, and now I forgive you. And beyond forgiveness, going to on that plateau, the next plateau toward love, is gratitude. It's saying, instead of someone saying to you, I forgive you, what if they were to say, I'm grateful to you. Even though we went through some challenging times, I learned from you and I'm grateful.
Mm. To be honest, no one has ever taught me or anyone, I believe, on the planet how to forgive someone. And the exercise that you just, walk us through is so powerful, because whenever someone talks about forgiveness, I always have this question, like, how do we forgive someone, right? Because we carry the resentment for so many years. By simply saying I forgive you is not gonna work. But I'm also thinking someone in the audience, or maybe, someone listening might be saying, so the first question is the actions, right, that the person did that I it's hard for me to forgive. What about cheating, right? Again, in a relationship context, cheating. I was cheated on, by my ex-partner, and their qualities is this and that, and but again, I will never cheat on someone. This is what I hear them saying. Like, in the third question, you ask them, in what way have you acted in that qualities, but they will say, I have never cheated, I will never cheat on anyone. So in that case, what would they be doing instead?
Well, okay, this is an excellent question. And so before I answer that, let me share an interesting statistic, because I'm working on a book on gender and leadership. And one thing that has been discovered is that men have the most trouble forgiving their girlfriend or wife if she's been physically unfaithful. Women, on the other hand, have the most trouble forgiving when their husband or boyfriend has been emotionally unfaithful. So there are two types of infidelity. There's physical infidelity. There's emotional infidelity. I'm sure we could think also of social infidelity if someone sort of betrays you in a group, or like ostracizes you from a social group and other sorts of forms. But uh, I think that if we think, okay, well, this person cheated on me, so, and what did they do? How did they cheat on me? They were, let's say, physically unfaithful. They were unfaithful. Well, what you could do after you say, okay, well, the quality is that they were unfaithful. Then you go to the third column. Who would consider me unfaithful? And you might find that if you add emotional infidelity to the definition of being unfaithful, then I'm sure each one of us has done that. In fact, there was a woman, Maria, one of the case studies in Love and Suffering, where she essentially broke up with her boyfriend Matt because he had been physically unfaithful to her. He had sex with another woman, and what helped her to reach a state of forgiveness was to be able to say, well, who when have I been emotionally unfaithful? And she recognized that actually there were so many times where she was he really wanted to spend time with her, and she instead wanted to go and do other things because she felt really unhappy in the relationship, and where she had become emotionally unfaithful. And this is the thing, it's they're different. I mean, me personally, like someone being physically unfaithful would be harder to get over than someone being emotionally unfaithful. In fact, I have a friend of mine, and her husband was recently emotionally unfaithful, like sending texts to another woman with all, flirting and so forth. And that was very difficult for them to get over. She kicked him out of the house for a couple of months. Eventually they worked it out. But yeah, that sort of sexual infidelity is I think could be really hard to get over. And so I think one way to do that is to think of it as betrayal, and then to acknowledge that betrayal can happen in many forms, and ask yourself, when have you betrayed someone? Because I think we all have betrayed others in many different forms over our lives, and that can help us to recognize it. Now, keep in mind, the reason you may not want to forgive, and I'll say this to your listeners, okay, if you're out there listening and you're like, hey, this guy like had sex with another woman, how am I supposed to forgive that, right? Or this woman I was seeing, she had sex with another guy, how am I supposed to forgive that? Let me say, it's necessary for your own personal development that you forgive them. It is not necessary that you have a continued relationship with them. So, in other words, forgiveness is necessary for you to move forward in your life. Trust is not necessary. And if you are still in the relationship, then you have to ask yourself, well, what benefits are you receiving such that you choose every day to stay in that relationship? And from those benefits, you may need to work back to, okay, is this person accountable? Is this person credible? Is this person predictable? Are they going to cheat on me again? Or is that never going to happen again? And the way you answer those questions is going to be pivotal for you determining today if you want to continue in a relationship with that person. But regardless of your decisions about a continued relationship and trust, it's absolutely imperative that you forgive them. If you don't believe me, let's go to the bowling alley massacre that took place in Maine in the United States. This was a couple years ago, and this guy Joey tried to apprehend the shooter who killed, I forget how many people, and he tried to apprehend the shooter, and he was shot and killed himself. And his father on CNN in an interview said, I am not going to hate this person who killed my son. I grew up in a home with love. and understanding and empathy and compassion. This person must not have received that. And I feel sorry for them that they didn't get to experience that in their life.
Wow.
I'm I'm going to I'm going to forgive them because and that's the thing. Forgiveness is not optional if you want to live a life where you do not just survive, but you thrive.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that story. It's a powerful reminder. So the last stage is love, right? And after all your research and experience, how would you define love? And how is it different from what most people understand it?
Okay, well, love is very, very difficult to define. I think actually this is not in Love and Suffering what I'm about to tell you. Okay, I personally believe that. So, for your listeners out there, you may believe in God or Buddha or Krishna or whatever your religious beliefs. You may not believe in God, and either way, it's okay. I will say, for me, from everything, all the research I've done has led me to believe that love is similar to God and to truth in that it's unattainable. The ideal is always above the real. Love is always above us. It's always something we're aiming for and we never fully achieve. And that's, I think, why we never grow tired of trying to understand it because we'll never fully understand it. It's out of our reach. But we need that ideal, just like you need a vision for your life, of how you want to live your life. You need values that you aspire toward daily to live and be the kind of person you wish to be. It's the same with love. We need to always aspire toward love, always believe that we can do more than we're currently doing to truly love. That's how I see love.
Beautiful. That's the progression model that's in the book. And to be honest, I have so many other questions, but I don't want to take too much of your time. And I know we barely scratched the surface, right? I still have got so many other questions.
I'd love to come back, Joyanne. You're a wonderful host, so you won't have to twist my arm to bring me back.
Yeah, I would love to because we have some difficulties, technical difficulties earlier, so it took some time away to deal with that. But before we end for today, is there anything else that you think is important based on our conversation that you want to share or leave for our listeners today?
Well, and maybe this could be like a kind of impetus for our next conversation. But I would say what I would like to share with you is that loneliness is skyrocketing right now.
Yeah.
I'm with Sarah Wright in New Zealand. She and I are the most published researchers on loneliness in organizations and loneliness in leadership. So if you look, for example, in the United States, over 60% of adult Americans are lonely based on the UCLA loneliness scale. In the UK, former Prime Minister Theresa May hired a minister for loneliness after a study came out that found that over 8 million British people were lonely. And I'm not making this up, British children spend more time outside than, sorry, British children spend less time outside than prison inmates. It's a true fact.
What?
In
That is insane.
British children spend less time outside than prison inmates. A recent study documented that. In Japan, so I don't know about you, Joyanne, but when I think about citizens who are a threat to society, the lowest on my list just about would be Japanese people 75 years and older. Okay. I don't think of them as like, okay, I need to worry if I'm walking down the street that I'm going to get robbed by an 80-year-old Japanese guy. Okay. Well, the rate of incarceration of Japanese elderly people, 75 and older, has quadrupled in the last 15 years.
Wow.
And the reason is they're going down to the corner store and stealing a small bag of rice, anything, so they can go to prison because at least in prison there are people to talk to. At least in prison there's a community. And there was an 87-year-old Japanese man. He put a sign on a bus stop, and this went viral. The sign read, "I'm 87. I don't have any family. Would any family take me?" No one responded to his ad, and 2 months later, he passed away. So loneliness is skyrocketing. Love and suffering is my attempt through my life's work on acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, and love to help us move past loneliness to be able to develop what I call CMSRs, compassionate, meaningful, sustainable relationships. I will say to your listeners, if you do want to buy Love and Suffering, it's available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. And 100% of the proceeds I donate to nonprofit education programs in Africa and Latin America. If buying a book is not high on your mind right now, I know times are difficult. It doesn't matter. I'd like to give you 2 free books. The 2 free books, one is called The Myth of Happiness, How Your Definition of Happiness Creates Your Unhappiness. The second book is called The Myth of Friendship, How Your Misunderstandings about Friendship Keep You Lonely. And if you want to download these books, it's super easy. Go to theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books. Once again, theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books. You go there, you put in your email, you'll get a confirmation email in your inbox, you confirm it, you get the download links. So anyway, Joyan, you've been a wonderful host. I just want to say I'm really grateful and honored that you've had me on your show, and thank you for that. I appreciate you.
Well, the honor is mine again. I will highly encourage my listeners to go and purchase your book, Love and Suffering. There's so much to learn, I'm sure. And definitely, I would love to have you back. So, guys, you heard it. There's part two to this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, because I do, like I mentioned, I do like 3 or 4 podcast appearances each week, and this has been one of my favorites because your questions they show that they're not just questions for you. You really feel
Uh,
what you're asking about. You've experienced a lot of this, and that makes you a wonderful host.
Oh, thank you so much for that. That means the world to me. Yep. So yeah, you will definitely be back, and we can do a part two. And I will definitely want to talk to you about loneliness and the myth of happiness. That really caught my attention. Friendship as well. I feel like there's so much more we can talk about. Maybe one episode is not enough, and two is not enough.
Well, I have a small list of just a few podcasts where I've already done like 4 episodes because they keep asking me to return. And for me, it's not just about doing the podcasts. It's also the people I'm connecting with, and you seem like a great person, and so I say we should continue getting to know each other and working together.
I love that. Yeah, you can ask my listeners about what kind of person I am. They'll tell you. All right, guys. I'll put the link in the show note below, including the free books. I have written it down, so I make sure I put it in the show notes so you can go ahead and download the book. And please, if you like this and if you enjoy this conversation, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow so you never miss another episode coming to you every Wednesday. Thanks for listening, and I wish you all a joyful and amazing day ahead. Thank you again for tuning into Find Joy Joyan podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and share it on your IG story and tag Find Joy Joyan_podcast so I know you are listening. And leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already done so. And remember to hit the subscribe button whether you are listening on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite platforms. If you love what we are doing and want to become one of our sponsors, you can send me a DM to connect. And thanks for being here. I will see you soon in the next episode.